Do you ever have one of those moments where you stare at your property and wonder if you're living in some kind of bizarre reality TV show? Because that's exactly what happened to me last month. And trust me, what followed was more dramatic than any show I've ever watched. Hi everyone, before I dive into this wild story, make sure to hit that subscribe button and ring the notification bell to catch more stories like this one. It all started when my wife Jennifer and I moved into what we thought was our dream home in Maple Ridge Estates. You know the type: quiet cul-de-sac, friendly neighbors, and most importantly, a spacious side yard that we planned to turn into a garden. Little did we know that piece of land would become the center of an HOA nightmare. About 3 weeks after moving in, I woke up to the sound of construction equipment. Looking out our bedroom window, I couldn't believe my eyes. There was a small crew paving over our side yard. I rushed outside in my pajamas, probably looking like a madman, to find Robert Wilson, our HOA president, supervising the work with a clipboard in hand. "Good morning, Mr. Anderson," he said, barely looking up from his clipboard. "We're addressing the community's parking shortage. This new lot will serve the entire neighborhood." I stood there, mouth agape, trying to process what was happening. "This is my property," I managed to say. "You can't just pave over it." Robert's response was something I'll never forget. With the most condescending smile I've ever seen, he said, "Actually, according to HOA bylaws, section 7.3, we have the right to develop any unutilized land for community benefit. You'll find it quite convenient for a small monthly fee of course." That's right. They were planning to charge me to park on my own land. Jennifer, bless her heart, immediately started digging through our closing documents while I tried to halt the construction. But by the time I got through to anyone with authority, half the yard was already paved. That evening, our neighbors Chris and Amy Taylor came over with a bottle of wine and some interesting information. Apparently, this wasn't the first time. Robert had pulled something like this. They told us about similar incidents with other homeowners, but most people either gave up or moved away. "The thing is," Chris said, lowering his voice, "Robert's been running this place like his personal kingdom for years. Nobody's ever really challenged him because he's got connections with the city council." Little did Robert know he'd picked the wrong homeowner to mess with this time. You see, before becoming a software developer, I'd spent 2 years working in real estate law, and I was about to put that knowledge to good use. After that first confrontation, I knew I needed to start gathering evidence. The next morning, I took photos and videos documenting everything: the fresh pavement, property line markers, and even the construction equipment they'd left behind. But what really caught my attention was a small sign they'd already installed: resident parking, 75 month, see HOA office for permits. Jennifer spent her lunch break at the county records office while I worked from home, keeping an eye on any additional developments. Around 2 p.m., I noticed Karen Mitchell, the HOA board member known for being Robert's right hand, measuring the new parking spaces with a tape measure. When she saw me watching through the window, she gave me this weird little wave and left a yellow envelope taped to our mailbox. Inside was an official-looking document titled Notice of Community Enhancement Assessment. According to this paper, we were required to pay not only the monthly parking fee, but also a one-time development contribution of $2,500 for improvements made to our property. The audacity was almost impressive. I called Chris Taylor immediately. "Has anything like this happened before?" I asked. His response was interesting. Apparently, 3 years ago, Robert had tried to install community storage sheds in several backyards, claiming they were for emergency supplies. The project mysteriously disappeared after one homeowner threatened legal action. That evening, while reviewing our property documents, Jennifer made a crucial discovery. Our deed clearly showed the side yard as part of our property, with no HOA easements or development rights. Even more interesting, She found a clause in the original community plans designating that specific area as a protected green space. I decided to attend the next HOA board meeting, scheduled for the following week, but before that, I needed more information. I submitted a formal request for all HOA documentation related to the parking lot project, including board meeting minutes where this decision was made, budget allocations, and permits. The response came from Susan White, the board secretary. Her email was brief. Dear Mr. Anderson, all development decisions are covered under the broad authority granted to the board in our bylaws. For specific documentation, please submit a request form with a $250 processing fee. That's when I noticed something odd about the construction itself. Bill Thompson, the maintenance supervisor, was leaving the site one evening when I caught up with him. After some casual conversation, he mentioned something that made my ears perk up. Yeah, it's strange they pushed this through so quick. Usually, we need city permits for any paving project, but Mr. Wilson said this was an emergency measure. The plot thickened when Maria Garcia from 2 doors down stopped by. She'd been on the board briefly last year, but resigned after disagreeing with Robert's methods. According to her, Robert had been talking about creating additional parking revenue streams for months, claiming the HOA needed funds for a mysterious special project. I spent that night diving deep into local zoning laws and HOA regulations. Turns out, any structural changes to designated green spaces required not just board approval, but a 75% vote from all homeowners. No such vote had ever taken place. Linda Parker, another board member who'd always seemed uncomfortable with Robert's leadership style, reached out to me privately. She shared that Robert had presented the parking lot as a done deal during their last meeting, claiming all necessary approvals were in place. When she asked to see the documentation, he brushed her off, saying it was being processed. The next day, I came home to find Robert and Karen doing a parking space inspection. They'd already painted lines and installed a payment collection. Your box. Robert spotted me and walked over with that same condescending smile. Mr. Anderson, I trust you've received the assessment notice. We'll need that development contribution by the end of the month. Oh, and we've assigned you space number 7. That'll be $75 monthly, starting next week. I remained calm, simply asking, could you show me the city permits for this project? His smile faltered slightly. Those are internal HOA matters. If you have concerns, file them through proper channels. You mean pay the $250 processing fee? I asked. Exactly, he replied, his smile now more of a smirk. We have procedures here, Mr. Anderson. Following them makes everything smoother. As they left, I noticed Karen taking photos of my house. When I asked why, she claimed it was for documentation purposes. It felt like intimidation, but they'd just given me more evidence for what was coming next. After that confrontation with Robert and Karen, I knew I needed to start building a solid case. The next morning, I reached out to a former colleague who specialized in property law. His response confirmed my suspicions. Not only was the parking lot construction illegal without proper permits, but the HOA's attempt to charge me for using my own property was completely unenforceable. I started methodically documenting everything. Jennifer helped me create a detailed timeline, including photos, emails, and recordings of every interaction. We also discovered something interesting while reviewing our security camera footage. The construction crew had arrived at 5:30 a.m., well before the city's allowed construction start time of 7 a.m. But the real breakthrough came from an unexpected source. Linda Parker, the uncomfortable board member, invited me for coffee at a cafe well outside our neighborhood. What she shared left me stunned. Apparently, Robert had been running a similar scheme in another community before moving here. He'd been forced to resign from that HOA board after homeowners discovered unauthorized use of funds. "The thing is," Linda whispered, glancing around nervously, "I've seen the books. This parking lot project isn't in our approved budget. When I questioned it, Robert claimed it was coming from an emergency maintenance fund. But I've never seen documentation. For that fund, I spent the next few days digging deeper into Robert's past. Through public records, I found a pattern of similar incidents: unauthorized construction projects, questionable fees, and sudden resignations from various community organizations. But he'd always managed to stay just within the gray areas of legality. The situation escalated when Steve Garcia, our neighbor down the street, shared some disturbing news. Robert had approached him about expanding the parking initiative into his side yard too. According to Steve, Robert had implied that opposing the project would result in increased scrutiny of his property's compliance with HOA regulations. I decided it was time to bring in some official oversight. I contacted the city planning department about the unpermitted construction. The clerk seemed unsurprised when I mentioned Maple Ridge Estates. "Oh, we've had issues with that HOA before," she said, pulling up some files.
Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story.
They've been cited twice this year for unauthorized modifications to protected green spaces. That afternoon, I received an email from Susan White, the board secretary. The subject line read, "Urgent Special Assessment Notice." The email detailed additional fees for landscape disruption and administrative overhead related to the parking lot project, totaling another $1,800. But Susan had made a crucial mistake. She'd accidentally included the entire email chain, including messages between Robert and Karen discussing how to expedite the project before anyone could object. The next day, while walking our dog, Jennifer noticed something odd about the payment collection box they'd installed. It wasn't connected to the HOA's official payment system. Instead, it had a separate lock and seemed to be collecting cash only. When she mentioned this to Amy Taylor, Amy revealed that she'd seen Karen collecting money from similar boxes in other parts of the neighborhood, but these collections never appeared in the monthly financial reports. Things took an even more interesting turn when Bill Thompson, the maintenance supervisor, asked to speak with me privately. He seemed nervous as he explained that the construction company that built the parking lot wasn't the HOA's usual contractor. In fact, he'd never seen them before, and their work didn't meet the community's usual standards. When he'd raised concerns about proper drainage and surface durability, Robert had told him to mind his own business. I was compiling all this information when we received another visit from Karen. This time, she came with a final notice threatening to place a lien on our property if we didn't pay the accumulated fees, now totaling over $4,500. She also mentioned that the board was considering additional measures to ensure compliance. That evening, we hosted a small gathering of concerned neighbors. Chris and Amy Taylor, the Garcias, and even Linda Parker attended. As we shared stories, a clear pattern emerged. Robert had been systematically pushing through unauthorized projects, creating arbitrary fees, and intimidating anyone who questioned his authority. But his biggest mistake was yet to come. Remember that mysterious, special project Maria Garcia had mentioned? Well, we were about to find out exactly what Robert had been planning, and it would blow this whole situation wide open. After our neighbor meeting, Linda Parker reached out with an urgent message. She'd stayed late at the HOA office to catch up on paperwork and discovered something alarming: blueprints for a massive development project. Robert wasn't just planning one parking lot. He was orchestrating a neighborhood-wide renovation that would convert multiple side yards and green spaces into paid parking areas. But here's where it got interesting. The plans included something called Phase 2, a proposed partnership with a local event venue just outside our community. Robert had been in talks to sell them exclusive access to our neighborhood parking spaces during their events, promising them overflow parking for concerts and conventions. I took this information to Bill Thompson, who confirmed my suspicions. The rushed construction on my property wasn't just about collecting parking fees from residents, it was a test run for a much larger scheme. Robert needed to prove the concept, worked before presenting it to the venue owners. The next morning, Jennifer and I received an unexpected visitor. Susan White, the board secretary, looked nervous as she handed me a thick envelope. "I can't be involved in this anymore," she whispered, glancing over her shoulder. "Everything you need is in here." Inside were copies of board meeting minutes, financial records, and emails dating back months. The documents revealed a disturbing pattern of financial mismanagement and unauthorized decisions. According to the records, Robert had been systematically moving HOA funds into various special project accounts. These transfers were logged as maintenance expenses, but the money trail led to a separate bank account that wasn't part of the official HOA books. Even more concerning, Karen Mitchell had been helping him falsify meeting minutes to make it appear as though these decisions had proper board approval. I spent that night reviewing everything with Chris Taylor, who had accounting experience. The numbers didn't add up. The HOA had been operating at a significant deficit for months, but Robert kept pushing through expensive projects. Where was the money coming from? The answer came from Maria Garcia, who'd been doing her own investigation. She discovered that Robert and Karen had registered a private LLC 6 months ago, coincidentally right after the first discussions with the event venue began. The company's name? Community Parking Solutions. While all this was happening, Robert seemed oblivious to the growing resistance. He actually had the audacity to send out a community newsletter praising the successful implementation of Phase 1 parking improvements and hinting at exciting new developments coming soon. Jennifer decided to take a more direct approach. She scheduled a meeting with the event venue's management, posing as a potential client. During their conversation, she learned that Robert had already collected a significant deposit from them, promising to have multiple parking lots ready before their upcoming concert season. The next day, we received another visit from Karen, this time with a document requiring our signatures. It was a property usage agreement that would effectively sign over our rights to the side yard. When we refused to sign, she left us with a thinly veiled threat. "Robert wants you to know that non-compliant homeowners will face significant consequences." That evening, Linda Parker called in a panic. She'd overheard Robert and Karen discussing plans to place liens on multiple properties, including ours, to force compliance with their parking scheme. They were planning to present it at an emergency board meeting scheduled for the next morning. A meeting most homeowners wouldn't be able to attend due to work commitments. I knew we had to act fast. With help from Chris, Amy, and several other neighbors, we quickly organized a response. While Robert thought he was consolidating his power, he had no idea that his carefully constructed scheme was about to come crashing down. That morning, Jennifer and I arrived early at the community center, armed with copies of every document Susan had provided. We weren't alone. Chris and Amy Taylor, the Garcias, and at least 20 other homeowners had taken time off work to attend. Robert's face when he walked in and saw the packed room was priceless. "This meeting is for board members only," he announced, trying to maintain control. But Linda Parker quickly spoke up, citing the HOA bylaws that guaranteed homeowners' right to attend any official meeting. Robert's jaw tightened as he realized he couldn't force us out. I noticed Karen frantically texting on her phone, probably warning their contact at the event venue. Too late. We'd already sent them a detailed report about the unauthorized construction and misappropriated funds. They'd responded by immediately cancelling their contract and demanding their deposit back. What happened next was like watching a carefully orchestrated symphony. As Robert tried to begin his presentation about the necessary property liens, Linda called for a point of order. She proceeded to read aloud emails, proving that Robert and Karen had been planning this parking scheme for months, deliberately hiding it from most board members. Susan White, finding her courage, stood up and confirmed that she'd been pressured to falsify meeting minutes. She revealed how Robert had threatened to expose personal information about board members who questioned his authority. The room erupted in angry murmurs. Bill Thompson then shared photos documenting the substandard construction work on my property, explaining how proper permits had never been obtained. He'd kept detailed records of every time Robert had ordered him to ignore safety regulations and city codes. But the knockout blow came from Maria Garcia. She projected onto the wall registration documents for Community Parking Solutions LLC, showing how Robert and Karen had planned to personally profit from converting our properties into commercial parking lots. The company's bank statements revealed they'd already collected thousands in deposits from the event venue. Robert's face turned from red to purple as he realized his empire was crumbling. He tried to shut down the meeting, but Steve Garcia, who we discovered was actually a retired judge, stood up and explained that any attempt to end the meeting would violate state HOA regulations. Karen attempted damage control, claiming everything had been done for the community's benefit. That's when Jennifer revealed the most damning evidence: recordings of Karen admitting to multiple homeowners that the parking fees were being diverted to their private company. "This is all a misunderstanding," Robert sputtered, but his usual confidence was gone. He knew we had him cornered. The other board members, finally seeing the full picture of his corruption, called for an immediate vote of no confidence. That's when Robert made his final mistake. In a burst of anger, he threatened to sue everyone present for defamation. Steve Garcia calmly informed him that making legal threats during an official HOA meeting was itself a violation of state law. The room fell silent as Robert realized he'd just dug his hole even deeper. Linda Parker, stepping fully into her role as voice of reason, proposed an emergency resolution to invalidate all unauthorized construction projects and fee assessments. The vote was unanimous. Even Karen, seeing the writing on the wall, abstained rather than support Robert. As the meeting concluded, Robert stormed out, but not before shouting that we'd regret this. We didn't. Within hours, word had spread throughout the neighborhood. Homeowners who'd been too intimidated to speak up started sharing their own stories of Robert's abuse of power. The next day, we received notice that Robert had resigned from the board, effective immediately. Karen followed suit shortly after, but we weren't done yet. The real work of rebuilding our community's trust and fixing the damage they'd caused was just beginning. The very next morning, Linda Parker called an emergency meeting to deal with the most pressing issue, that illegal parking lot on my property. The new board, with Linda as interim president, immediately voted to halt all unauthorized construction in projects. But we soon discovered that fixing the damage wouldn't be as simple as just tearing up the pavement. City inspectors arrived to assess the situation, and their report was concerning. The improper construction had damaged our property's drainage system, potentially affecting the entire neighborhood's water management. Even worse, they found traces of prohibited materials in the asphalt mix. The cut-rate contractors Robert had hired hadn't followed environmental regulations. Meanwhile, Jennifer had been working with our insurance company, documenting everything for potential claims. That's when we uncovered another layer of Robert's deception. He'd never filed the required permits with the city, meaning our HOA insurance wouldn't cover the removal and restoration costs. The estimated bill, over $45,000. But here's where our community really showed its strength. Steve Garcia, our retired judge neighbor, helped us draft a legal demand for restitution from Robert and Karen's private company, Community Parking Solutions, LLC. When confronted with the evidence of their fraud, including the diverted venue, deposits, they quickly agreed to cover all restoration costs rather than face criminal charges. The cleanup process revealed even more issues. Bill Thompson, now working directly with licensed contractors, discovered that the rushed construction had damaged underground utility lines. We had to coordinate with multiple city departments to ensure everything was properly repaired. During one of these meetings, a city official shared something interesting. Robert had apparently tried this same scheme in 2 other communities, always targeting newer homeowners who might not know their rights. Susan White, feeling guilty about her role in the situation, provided us with complete financial records. The numbers were shocking. Over 18 months, Robert and Karen had collected nearly $100,000 in unauthorized fees and assessments from various homeowners. They'd hidden these funds through a complex web of fake maintenance contracts and inflated vendor invoices. What really got to me was discovering how they'd specifically targeted certain homeowners. They'd keep detailed notes on who was least likely to fight back. Single parents, elderly residents, people who worked long hours. It wasn't just about the money. It was about power and control. Linda organized a town hall meeting to address everyone's concerns. The turnout was incredible. Nearly every household was represented. People who'd never spoken at meetings before shared their stories of intimidation and financial hardship under Robert's leadership. One elderly couple had actually been considering selling their home because they couldn't afford his endless special assessments. That meeting became a turning point for our community. We established new transparency guidelines, requiring all board decisions to be publicly documented. Financial records would be independently audited quarterly. Most importantly, we created a homeowner advocacy committee to review any proposed projects or rule changes. But Robert wasn't done with us yet. A week after the cleanup began, we received notice that he was suing the HOA for defamation and wrongful termination. His lawsuit claimed we'd orchestrated a conspiracy to remove him from power. Steve Garcia just laughed when he saw the filing. Robert had forgotten that as HOA president, he'd signed documents acknowledging that board members served at the pleasure of the community. The lawsuit was dismissed within weeks, but it served as a valuable lesson. We worked with our attorneys to strengthen the HOA's bylaws, adding specific provisions against self-dealing and requiring multiple levels of approval for any construction projects. While organizing the HOA's paperwork, Linda Parker discovered folders dating back 3 years, filled with rejected permit applications. Apparently, Robert had been trying to implement his parking lot plan long before I moved in, but the city had repeatedly denied his requests due to environmental concerns. Jennifer spent a weekend cross-referencing these applications with our HOA's financial records. She found something disturbing. Every time a permit was rejected, Robert would create a new special assessment for random violations. It was his way of punishing the community for his failed schemes. The real breakthrough came when Chris Taylor noticed a pattern in the HOA's maintenance contracts. All the major projects over the past 2 years had been awarded to companies, registered to the same business address, an office building in the next town over. After some digging, we discovered these companies were all shell corporations created by Robert's brother-in-law. Maria Garcia organized a door-to-door campaign to identify other victims of Robert's schemes. The stories we heard were heartbreaking. An elderly couple had been forced to take out a second mortgage to pay his fraudulent assessments. A single mother had been working double shifts to cover monthly infrastructure fees that never went toward actual improvements. We also learned that Karen had been running her own side operation. As head of the Architectural Review Committee, she'd been charging expedited processing fees for approval of home improvements. These fees, ranging from $500 to $2,000, went straight into her personal account. Bill Thompson provided us with maintenance logs showing how Robert had deliberately neglected crucial repairs while focusing on his pet projects. The community pool's filtering system had needed replacement for months, but Robert had diverted those funds to pay for parking lot feasibility studies. One evening, while reviewing security footage from the HOA office, Susan White noticed something odd. Late at night, Robert and Karen would often meet with someone in an expensive black SUV. After enhancing the images, we identified the visitor as a developer known for buying out troubled communities and converting them into commercial properties. This discovery led us to Robert's ultimate plan. He hadn't just been trying to create parking lots. He'd been intentionally driving down property values and creating financial hardship for homeowners. His goal was to force enough people to sell so the developer could acquire a controlling interest in our community. Linda called an emergency meeting to share these findings. The room was silent as we presented the evidence. Then, something remarkable happened. People started offering solutions. A retired accountant volunteered to audit our books. A construction manager offered to assess all the neglected maintenance issues. A lawyer promised to help revise our bylaws. That meeting marked the beginning of our community's transformation. We established working groups to address different aspects of recovery: financial oversight, maintenance planning, legal compliance, and community engagement. The key was transparency. Every decision, every dollar spent would be visible to all homeowners. But we weren't content just fixing past problems. We wanted to prevent future abuse. Steve Garcia helped us draft what we called the Homeowners' Bill of Rights, a comprehensive document outlining the board's limitations and homeowners' protections. Any significant changes to property or finances would now require a supermajority vote of all residents. The following week, we received an unexpected visit from state HOA regulators. They'd been monitoring similar situations across the county and wanted to use our community's response as a model for other associations. Our documentation of Robert's schemes had exposed a pattern of fraud that extended far beyond our neighborhood. The letter came from a law firm representing several other HOAs in neighboring counties. Apparently, our exposure of Robert's parking lot scheme had caught their attention. They'd been investigating similar cases where Robert and Karen had served as consulting board members, helping other communities optimize their revenue streams. Jennifer and I spent a weekend compiling evidence to share with these other communities. The pattern was identical. Robert would join troubled HOAs as a consultant, implement aggressive fee structures, and push for parking lot construction. Karen would follow, setting up her architectural review scheme. Linda Parker organized a meeting with representatives from 5 other affected communities. The stories were eerily similar. Each neighborhood had experienced the same progression. First came the emergency assessments, then the parking proposals, and finally, the mysterious developer in the black SUV. But here's where it got interesting. Amy Taylor, who worked in commercial real estate, recognized the developer's name. He was connected to a larger corporation known for converting residential areas into mixed-use developments. The parking lots weren't just about collecting fees. They were part of a broader strategy to change our neighborhood's zoning classifications. Bill Thompson brought forward maintenance records from other communities where Robert had worked. In each case, essential repairs were ignored, while funds were diverted to community improvement projects. These projects always involved creating commercial-friendly infrastructure like expanded parking areas and access roads. The state HOA regulators were particularly interested in our findings. They'd been receiving complaints about similar schemes, but hadn't connected the dots until now. Our documentation provided the evidence they needed to launch a formal investigation into Robert and Karen's activities across multiple jurisdictions. Steve Garcia helped us coordinate with legal teams from the other communities. Together, we built a comprehensive case showing how Robert and Karen had systematically exploited HOA regulations for personal gain. The evidence was overwhelming. Bank records, falsified documents, and testimonies from dozens of affected homeowners. Meanwhile, Susan White discovered something crucial in the HOA office archives. Years ago, Robert had proposed similar community improvements in his previous neighborhood. That community had successfully stopped him, but instead of giving up, he'd refined his approach and started targeting other neighborhoods. The collaboration between communities led to an unexpected benefit. We started sharing resources and ideas for better HOA management. Each neighborhood had developed different solutions to common problems, and together we created a handbook for identifying and preventing board member abuse. One evening, while discussing our findings with Chris and Amy Taylor, we received an urgent call from Maria Garcia. She'd been contacted by a journalist investigating corporate takeovers of residential communities. The reporter had uncovered connections between Robert's consulting company and several large development corporations. This discovery led us to Robert's endgame. He wasn't just a corrupt HOA president, he was part of a larger scheme to force out homeowners and facilitate commercial development. The parking lots were just the first step in making our communities less residential and more business-friendly. Linda organized a joint press conference with representatives from all affected communities. The media coverage was immediate and extensive. Other neighborhoods started coming forward with similar stories, and soon Robert and Karen's entire network began to unravel. The state regulators used our case to push for stronger HOA oversight legislation. They invited Linda and Steve to testify about our experience and the importance of homeowner protections. Our community's response to corruption was becoming a model for HOA reform. A routine meeting with the HOA regulators took an unexpected turn when they shared information about similar cases across the state. It wasn't just our region. Dozens of communities had faced identical scenarios. The regulators had mapped out a pattern. First came consultants like Robert, then the parking lots, and finally corporate buyouts. During this meeting, Linda Parker received an urgent text from Susan White. While organizing old files, she'd found a laptop Robert had left behind in the HOA office. The laptop contained emails between Robert and several development corporations, outlining a systematic approach to community takeovers. They called it Operation Transition, a plan to gradually convert residential areas into commercial zones. Jennifer spent 3 days analyzing the emails with Steve Garcia. The plan was intricate. First, install cooperative board members, then create financial hardship through excessive fees and fines, and finally offer relief through corporate buyouts. The parking lots were just phase 1, designed to establish commercial zoning precedents. Bill Thompson confirmed our suspicions about the construction companies. They weren't just overcharging for substandard work, they were deliberately installing infrastructure that would support future commercial development. The drainage issues on my property weren't mistakes. They were part of a larger plan to prepare the land for commercial use. Chris and Amy Taylor organized a community task force to review all contracts and vendor relationships from Robert's tenure. They discovered that several maintenance companies were actually subsidiaries of the same development corporation that had been sending representatives in the black SUV. The media coverage intensified when Maria Garcia shared our findings with investigative reporters. Local news stations ran special reports on corporate infiltration of residential communities. The neighborhood started contacting us, sharing similar stories and asking for help. State regulators used our evidence to launch a broader investigation into corporate manipulation of HOA governance. They found that Robert and Karen weren't unique. There was an entire network of consulting board members working to facilitate community takeovers. One evening, while reviewing security footage with Linda, we noticed something strange. The developer's black SUV had been making regular visits to other communities in our area, always late at night. We compiled a list of these locations and found that each one had recently experienced significant increases in HOA fees and sudden pushes for community improvements. Susan White's continued digging revealed financial connections between Robert's consulting company and multiple shell corporations. These entities were being used to hide the true ownership of properties being acquired through forced sales and foreclosures. The breakthrough came when Steve Garcia discovered a pattern in the property transfers. Every time a homeowner was forced to sell due to Robert's excessive fees, their property was purchased by one of these shell companies. The corporate developers were playing a long game, slowly accumulating properties while maintaining the appearance of a normal residential community. Linda organized an emergency meeting with representatives from affected communities across the state. Together, we created a database of suspicious HOA activities and property transfers. The pattern was undeniable. This was a coordinated effort to transform residential neighborhoods into commercial developments. The state investigators called an emergency meeting with representatives from all affected communities. They'd connected Robert's operation transition to a nationwide pattern of residential neighborhood conversions. The developers weren't just targeting our area. They had similar operations running in multiple states. Jennifer and Steve Garcia spent days analyzing the corporate structure behind these operations. The black SUV visits were linked to a company called Urban Evolution Partners, which operated through hundreds of shell companies. Each shell company would purchase foreclosed properties in targeted neighborhoods, slowly building controlling interests. During this investigation, Bill Thompson made a crucial discovery in the construction records. The substandard materials used in our parking lot matched those used in dozens of other communities. These materials were specifically chosen because they met commercial zoning requirements while barely passing residential codes, further evidence of the planned transition. Linda Parker organized a conference call with HOA representatives from across the country. Communities from Florida to Washington state reported identical patterns: consultant board members, parking lot projects, and mysterious property purchases by shell companies. The scale of the operation was staggering. Chris and Amy Taylor created a database tracking property sales in affected communities. The pattern was clear. Whenever HOA fees spiked under consultant management, property sales to shell companies increased. These companies were deliberately creating financial hardship to force sales. Maria Garcia's media contacts helped break the story nationally. Major news networks picked up the investigation, revealing how corporate developers were systematically undermining residential communities. The coverage sparked congressional interest in HOA regulations and corporate transparency. Susan White found evidence that Robert and Karen weren't just local operatives. They were part of a trained network of consultants. Urban Evolution Partners had a playbook for community takeovers, complete with scripts for board meetings and templates for fee increases. The state regulators used our evidence to freeze the assets of several shell companies. This action revealed connections to even larger corporate entities, including international real estate investment firms. Our local HOA dispute had uncovered a global operation. Late one evening, we received an encrypted email from a whistleblower within Urban Evolution Partners. The attached documents confirmed our worst fears. They had targeted over 200 communities nationwide, with plans to convert them into commercial developments over the next decade. Steve Garcia helped coordinate legal teams from multiple states to build a class action lawsuit. The evidence was overwhelming: systematic fraud, corporate conspiracy, and violations of housing laws across multiple jurisdictions. The developers had created an elaborate scheme to circumvent residential zoning protections. Linda called an emergency meeting of our community task force. The whistleblower's documents included plans for Phase 2 of our neighborhood's transition complete, with designs for strip malls and office complexes. They had been planning this conversion for years before Robert even joined our board. The class action lawsuit gained momentum as more homeowners joined. Over 5,000 families from 200 communities had signed on, sharing stories of financial hardship and corporate manipulation. Steve Garcia coordinated with legal teams across multiple states, building a case that would expose decades of systematic abuse. Jennifer discovered something crucial in the whistleblower documents: urban evolution. Partners had a ranking system for vulnerable communities. They targeted neighborhoods with aging populations, high percentages of single-parent households, and residents working multiple jobs. These demographics were less likely to attend HOA meetings or challenge board decisions. Linda Parker organized a national conference call with HOA leaders. Representatives from affected communities shared strategies for fighting corporate takeovers. We learned about successful resistance efforts in other states and adapted their methods for our situation. Bill Thompson's analysis of construction records revealed a disturbing pattern. The parking lot projects weren't just about establishing commercial presence. They were part of a larger infrastructure modification plan. Hidden in the technical specifications were preparations for future retail development, including reinforced foundations and pre-planned utility connections. Chris and Amy Taylor created a nationwide alert system for suspicious HOA activity. Communities could report consultant board members, unusual fee increases, and property purchases by shell companies. This early warning system helped prevent several attempted takeovers before they gained momentum. The media coverage intensified when Maria Garcia coordinated with investigative journalists across the country. They exposed connections between urban evolution partners and prominent politicians who had blocked HOA reform legislation. The political fallout was immediate, with several state legislatures launching their own investigations. Susan White's continued research uncovered internal training documents for consultant board members like Robert. The materials included scripts for intimidating homeowners, strategies for circumventing local regulations, and methods for hiding corporate influence behind legitimate-seeming HOA activities. State regulators used our evidence to freeze more corporate assets and launch criminal investigations. The scale of fraud was staggering. Millions of dollars in illegal fees, forged documents, and manipulated property transfers. The investigation expanded to include money laundering and racketeering charges. One evening, we received an unexpected call from a former Urban Evolution Partners executive. He offered to testify about the company's practices, including their long-term strategy to convert residential neighborhoods into commercial developments. His testimony would prove crucial in the upcoming legal battles. Linda organized a community protection workshop, sharing our experiences with other neighborhoods. We taught them how to identify corporate infiltration attempts, protect vulnerable residents, and maintain community control of their HOAs. The workshop became a model for similar programs nationwide. Steve Garcia helped draft new state legislation to prevent corporate takeovers of residential communities. The proposed laws would require transparency in property ownership, limit consultant board members' authority, and protect homeowners from predatory fee increases. The federal court ruling was unanimous. Urban Evolution Partners and its network of shell companies were found guilty of systematic fraud, racketeering, and violations of housing laws. The company was ordered to pay $500 million in damages to affected homeowners and dissolve all its residential holdings. Robert and Karen, along with dozens of other consultant board members, faced criminal charges. The evidence we'd gathered proved crucial. Emails, financial records, and testimony from the whistleblower executive painted a clear picture of organized corruption. Robert was sentenced to 5 years in federal prison, while Karen received 3 years for her role in the scheme. But the real victory wasn't just the legal outcome. The case sparked a nationwide reform movement. Steve Garcia's proposed legislation became a model for other states, with new laws requiring complete transparency in HOA operations and strict limits on corporate influence in residential communities. Our community transformed too. Linda Parker's leadership style became a blueprint for HOA governance. Monthly meetings now had record attendance, with homeowners actively participating in every decision. The parking lot on my property, it's been converted into a community garden managed by a rotating committee of residents. Bill Thompson implemented a new maintenance system with regular inspections and transparent bidding for all contracts. Every project now requires multiple bids and community approval, ensuring quality work at fair prices. The system has become so successful that neighboring HOAs have adopted it. Jennifer and Chris Taylor developed a comprehensive training program for HOA board members, focusing on ethical leadership and community engagement. The program has been implemented in communities across the country, helping prevent future exploitation attempts. The national alert system we created continues to grow. Maria Garcia now runs a non-profit organization dedicated to protecting residential communities from corporate takeovers. They've successfully prevented dozens of attempted conversions and helped countless neighborhoods maintain their residential character. Susan White's research led to the creation of a public database tracking corporate ownership in residential areas. This transparency tool has become invaluable for communities wanting to protect themselves from predatory development schemes. Most importantly, our story has inspired other communities to stand up for their rights. The movement we started has grown into a national coalition of homeowners working to preserve residential neighborhoods and protect them from corporate exploitation. Thank you for following this incredible journey. Remember, when communities unite, no corporation is powerful enough to break them apart. About a month after the court ruling, I received an anonymous email from someone claiming to be an architect who had worked on Urban Evolution's master plans. They shared detailed blueprints showing how the parking lot scheme was just phase 1 of a massive 5-phase development strategy. The plans revealed that they weren't just targeting individual neighborhoods, they were attempting to reshape entire suburban districts into commercial zones. Jennifer spent weeks analyzing these blueprints with local urban planning experts. They discovered that Urban Evolution had been systematically purchasing properties along major transit corridors, creating a network of potential commercial developments disguised as residential communities. The parking lots were strategically placed to eventually connect these properties, forming continuous commercial strips. Linda Parker organized a special community meeting to share these findings. During the presentation, a former Urban Evolution employee who had attended anonymously stood up and confirmed everything. He explained how the company had spent years studying traffic patterns and demographic shifts to identify vulnerable communities. They specifically targeted areas they predicted would become valuable commercial corridors within the next decade. Bill Thompson made another crucial discovery while overseeing the removal of our parking lot. Hidden beneath the pavement were pre-installed utility connections designed for future commercial development. These installations had never been disclosed in any permits or plans submitted to the city. Similar unauthorized infrastructure was found in other affected communities. Chris and Amy Taylor started documenting cases where other development companies were using similar tactics. They uncovered a disturbing trend. Several major corporations had created their own versions of Operation Transition, using slightly different methods but working toward the same goal of commercial conversion. Maria Garcia's continued investigation revealed connections between urban evolution and several prominent real estate investment firms. These companies had been quietly funding similar operations across the country, using complex networks of shell companies to hide their involvement. The parking lot scheme had exposed just one thread in a massive web of corporate manipulation. Steve Garcia helped organize a national conference on protecting residential communities. Representatives from hundreds of neighborhoods attended, sharing stories and strategies. The conference led to the creation of a permanent advocacy organization dedicated to preserving residential areas against corporate takeovers. Susan White's research into Urban Evolution's internal communications revealed something even more disturbing. The company had been developing artificial intelligence algorithms to identify vulnerable communities. These programs analyzed everything, from demographic data to social media posts, helping them target neighborhoods most susceptible to their takeover strategies. One evening, while reviewing security footage from the old HOA office, we discovered something we'd missed earlier. The mysterious black SUV had been making regular deliveries of documents to Robert's office late at night. When we enhanced the footage, we could see that many of these documents bore government seals, suggesting potential involvement of corrupt local officials. Linda organized a task force to investigate these connections. They uncovered evidence that several city planning officials had been secretly working with Urban Evolution, fast-tracking permits and overlooking violations in exchange for future considerations. This discovery led to a separate federal investigation into municipal corruption. The impact of our case continued to ripple through the legal system. States began passing laws requiring regular audits of HOA finances and strict limits on corporate involvement in residential governance. Some even created special oversight boards to monitor suspicious development patterns in residential areas. The fallout from the Urban Evolution Partners scandal had taken an unexpected turn, revealing a network of international real estate manipulation that none of us could have anticipated. It started when Jennifer received a cryptic message from a real estate developer in Canada. They had been following our story and noticed striking similarities to situations in several Toronto suburbs. After some investigation, we discovered that Urban Evolution Partners had connections to a European investment consortium that specialized in converting residential areas into commercial zones. Linda Parker organized a virtual conference with community leaders from Canada, the UK, and Australia. The patterns were identical: consultant board members, parking lot projects, and systematic attempts to change zoning classifications. This wasn't just an American problem. It was a global strategy being implemented by sophisticated corporate networks. Bill Thompson's expertise proved invaluable when analyzing construction documents from international communities. The same technical specifications, down to the type of subgrade materials used in parking lots, appeared in projects across multiple countries. This standardization suggested a coordinated global approach to community conversion. Chris and Amy Taylor created an international database tracking suspicious development patterns. Communities worldwide could now share information about corporate takeover attempts in real time. This global warning system helped identify and prevent several conversion attempts before they gained momentum. Maria Garcia's media contacts helped bring international attention to the story. News outlets from various countries began investigating similar cases in their regions. The coverage revealed a complex web of corporate entities working to systematically convert residential neighborhoods into commercial developments worldwide. Steve Garcia collaborated with international lawyers to develop a framework for protecting residential communities across different legal systems. Their work led to the creation of a global alliance of homeowner advocacy groups, sharing resources and strategies for fighting corporate takeovers. Susan White discovered that Urban Evolution's parent company had been testing their community conversion strategies in developing countries before implementing them in more regulated markets. They used these test cases to refine their tactics and identify potential legal obstacles. One particularly interesting discovery came from a former Urban Evolution executive who had worked in their Asian markets. He revealed that the company had developed sophisticated software to analyze satellite imagery, identifying potential target communities based on their physical layout and proximity to growing commercial areas. Linda organized an international symposium on community preservation, bringing together experts from various fields to develop comprehensive protection strategies. The event led to the creation of a global database of corporate development tactics and effective countermeasures. The impact of our investigation continued to grow. International regulatory bodies began examining the role of corporate influence in residential development. Several countries proposed new laws specifically designed to protect residential communities from predatory development practices. It all started when a mysterious USB drive arrived in my mailbox. The sender, who identified themselves only as a former IT contractor for Urban Evolution, had included a note explaining that what we'd discovered was just the surface of their technological infrastructure. The drive contained internal documents detailing an advanced artificial intelligence system codenamed Project Terraform. Jennifer, with her background in software development, spent days analyzing the files. What she found was shocking. Urban Evolution had developed a sophisticated AI algorithm that could predict neighborhood vulnerability with frightening accuracy. The system analyzed everything from property values and demographic data to social media sentiment and local business patterns, identifying communities ripe for their conversion strategy. Linda Parker organized an emergency meeting with cybersecurity experts who volunteered to help us understand the full scope of Project Terraform. They discovered that the AI system had been actively monitoring thousands of neighborhoods across the globe, ranking them based on their potential for successful conversion to commercial zones. Our community had been selected because the algorithm predicted minimal resistance to systematic change. Bill Thompson made a crucial connection when reviewing the construction specifications. The seemingly random parking lot locations weren't random at all. They were precisely calculated by the AI to create optimal traffic patterns for future commercial development. The system had essentially mapped out entire city transformations years in advance. Chris and Amy Taylor uncovered something even more disturbing in the data. The AI wasn't just analyzing current conditions, it was actively influencing them. Through a network of bot accounts and targeted advertising, Urban Evolution had been subtly manipulating local social media discussions about community development, creating artificial support for their projects. Maria Garcia's investigation revealed that Project Terraform had a predictive accuracy rate of over 90% in identifying communities that would eventually succumb to commercial conversion. The system used machine learning to refine its targeting criteria, learning from both successful and failed takeover attempts to improve its strategy. Steve Garcia helped coordinate with tech lawyers who specialized in AI ethics and data privacy. They were stunned by the sophistication of Urban Evolution's technology. The company had essentially created a digital blueprint for systematic community manipulation, using data harvesting and predictive modeling in ways that pushed legal boundaries. Susan White discovered that the AI system had another disturbing feature. It created detailed psychological profiles of key community members, identifying potential allies and obstacles to their plans. This explained why Robert and Karen had seemed so well prepared to handle specific residents' objections and concerns. One evening, while analyzing the Project Terraform data, we found evidence that the system had been integrated with smart city infrastructure in several locations. Urban Evolution had been collecting data from traffic cameras, smart meters, and other municipal systems to refine their targeting algorithms. Linda organized a tech summit, bringing together experts in AI ethics, urban planning, and community advocacy. They worked to develop countermeasures against algorithmic community targeting, creating tools that communities could use to detect and resist digital manipulation attempts. The implications of Project Terraform extended far beyond our initial parking lot dispute. Urban Evolution had essentially created a blueprint for automated community takeover, using artificial intelligence to streamline the process of converting residential neighborhoods into commercial developments. The system was designed to evolve and improve itself, learning from each successful conversion to become more effective at targeting vulnerable communities. Don't miss our next episode, where we reveal how communities are fighting back against algorithmic targeting. Hit subscribe and the notification bell to stay updated on this developing story. Up next, you've got two more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.